Hey everybody, and welcome to the very first episode of this wildlife photography series. Now, before we get into the exciting stuff like freezing action or capturing golden light and editing images, we've got to start with the basics, and that is getting to know your camera. Because, let's be real, out there in the bush things happen fast. A leopard could walk across the road, or a bird takes off in flight, or elephants start interacting, and you don't really have time to be digging through menus or figuring out which settings to use, because essentially your camera is supposed to feel like an extension of yourself. And that's what today's episode is all about. So let's start with the different camera modes. These are the foundations of controlling light and movement in your image. Auto mode. This is fine for beginners, but it does mean that the camera makes all the decisions, which could result in high ISOs, slow shutter speeds, and missed focus. And in wildlife photography, that's usually a recipe for either noisy or blurry images. Aperture priority. This is the favorite for wildlife portraits, as you choose the aperture and that controls the depth of field, which is how much of your image is in focus from the front to the back. So a wide aperture like f2.8 or f4 blurs out the background beautifully and directs the viewer's eyes to the subject. However, a narrower aperture like f8 or f11 brings more of the scene into focus, and this is great for environmental shots, like an elephant moving across a landscape. Shutter priority. Now we're talking movement as you control how long the shutter stays open. A fast shutter, like a 2000th of a second, freezes action, which is perfect for a vulture swooping down or wild dogs chasing impala. A slower shutter, like a 60th of a second, introduces motion blur, which can be really creative. Let's say a herd of elephant running down to a waterhole with just enough blur to capture the energy of the moment. Manual mode, full control. This is where you take charge of the ISO, the shutter speed, and the aperture. It's brilliant where the light isn't changing quickly. So, for instance, golden hour or at night when you're photographing stars and silhouettes. It gives you absolute consistency across all of your frames. The big thing to remember is no mode is better than the other. It's about knowing which tool fits the story you want to tell. And so out in the field, I switch between them depending on the moment. Okay, so now we know the modes, but how we actually use the camera out in the field comes down to a few essential functions. And these are the things that separate casual shooters from confident wildlife photography. Back button focus. Instead of half pressing the shutter to focus, you assign focusing to a button at the back of the camera. That way the shutter only takes the photo. This gives you way more control because you can lock onto a subject and recompose without the camera having to refocus every time you click. And this is especially powerful with moving animals. Imagine a lion walking towards you, you just hold your thumb down, track the movement, and fire when the moment's right. Autofocus modes. Single autofocus is ideal for precise shots, like a perched bird. Dynamic or zone autofocus is better for slightly moving subjects. And tracking autofocus is ideal for erratic moving subjects like wild dogs or birds taking off in flight. Knowing which autofocus mode to use is crucial for the moment. Drive modes. Wildlife can be unpredictable. Sometimes you want one deliberate shot like a zebra in perfect light. And other times you might want to shoot a burst at 20 or 30 frames a second to capture a sequence like leopards mating. The key is learning when to switch so you don't miss the critical moment. Think of these features as shortcuts that buy you time in the field, because in wildlife photography, time is the difference between a missed shot and a masterpiece. Alright, let's take this to the bush and put it into practice. Before I even leave camp, I make sure my camera's ready, and that means batteries are charged, memory cards are formatted, and settings are dialed in. For early mornings, I usually start around about f4 aperture, ISO 1600, and a shutter speed of about 1000th of a second, and that way I'm prepared for almost about anything. Imagine this, you're driving out just as the sun rises and suddenly a lion steps onto the road. If your camera isn't ready, that moment is gone before you even power up. But if you've set everything in advance, all you have to do is lift the camera, focus, and shoot. That's what I mean when I say your camera should feel like an extension of you. It's not about thinking, it's about reacting instinctively. So let's wrap this up with the essentials. Learn your modes and understand when to use them. Understand focus, autofocusing modes, and drive settings. And lastly, customize your camera so that it works for you and not against you. The less you have to think about your gear, the more you can focus on the real subject, and that's the wildlife in front of you. Thanks for watching, and if you found this useful, please subscribe because we've got a lot more coming your way. See you in the next episode.